Today, homeschooling veteran and author Phyllis Wheeler
and homeschooling mom, Sarah Boble, prepare you for your next trip to the library. We are going to talk about a new book published in 2020 by Kaela Noel. It's called Coup, and my family and I are listening to it on audio, so this is the version that we have. Make sure you stay and listen in for an interview with the author after Phyllis talks about the book. So before I ask my first question about what you thought about the book, can you give a little summary, Phyllis, or tell us a little bit about the premise of the book?
Yes, this book is about a girl who is being raised by pigeons on a rooftop in a big city, which I think must be New York City.
Mm.
And they rescued her when she was a newborn. They lifted her up to the roof. She had been left on a doorstep. They lifted her up by grabbing the blanket, the edges of her blanket, and a whole flock of them just lifting her up. And so then they've been feeding her from the dumpsters. So her diet seems to be, donuts, stuff like that. And she she's about 10 years old now. So her best friend Pigeon is injured, and he's so injured that he's not likely to survive. Pigeons in the wild who are injured, he's got a broken wing. So what can she do? She's just heartsick. So she remembers that there is a woman who comes to the alley below and feeds the pigeons and even has taken one or two injured ones home and brought them back. So she decides she needs to take her friend Bird down to the woman. And this idea just terrifies her. But she does it. And uh, that starts the ball rolling. And pretty soon she is actually living with the woman, Tully, and adjusting to the all of the things that we take for granted. She's been speaking pigeon language. She's been she hasn't had any clothes except for plastic bags and then maybe a blanket of birds to keep her warm when she's resting. She she just doesn't know anything.
Mm.
So there's some very funny scenes like in the supermarket.
Mm. So, do you think that this book as a whole passes the good story test?
Yes, I think it does. I think it's enjoyable. I think it carries the tension all the way to the end, and it has character development. Ku is kind of I wouldn't call her a fraidy cat, but a fraidy person, and she has some opportunities to be brave. So it's good.
Mm. So speaking about the character development, what are some of the attributes and character attributes in addition that you've seen in Ku or Tully or any of the, I guess those are the two main characters in the book.
Hmm. And Burr, the pigeon.
Yeah, the Persian. Best friend pigeon.
Yeah, the well, Tully is she's just a very loving person. She never had any children, and she's a widow. Now is her opportunity to really love a child, and she just jumps right into it. It's really
Mm.
lovely. She's flexible. She's trying to figure out how to make it work for the long run. Um, yeah, and Ku, well, being timid is her moving from timid to brave is her main character arc, I would say. But also, she's gradually learning to speak, and she's making a few friends. There's a girl her age in Tully's apartment building. And so it's yeah, it's interesting to follow her through these intricacies of adjusting to being a human. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit like maybe what happened to Mowgli,
Mm.
when he went to the man village, which Rudyard Kipling didn't show us that part, but that's what this is. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. So, a lot of times when people read, kids read books, it's a good thing for them to be able to see themselves somewhere in the characters. And none of us was raised by pigeons. The kids aren't going to be widows raising children for the first time. So, do you think the book did a good job capturing the what it feels to be like the main characters in the book?
I do think so. I think that this author, Kaela Noel, has a real gift for
Mhm.
standing in someone else's shoes to the to an extreme degree, really. I mean, I don't know how she did this idea of like what would a person raised by pigeons think like? And what would she want? And so on. There's a scene I wanted to read, a short one. So this is soon after Ku has come to live with Tully, or very soon after it. When they reached the end of the street, Ku spotted a metal cylinder on the sidewalk. It was piled high with bags and cups and empty boxes, but crowning the messy tower was something extraordinary, a waxy brownish yellow lump, a banana. Shaking off Tully's hand, Ku grabbed it. Ku, no, put that down. That's trash. Tully snatched the precious banana out of Ku's hand and tossed it into a snowdrift. Ku yelped. Technically, that's littering, muttered Tully. I'm sure a squirrel will take care of it. The banana was less than half eaten and only a little bit brown. Ku blinked. She looked at the snow pile into which it had vanished. Then she began to cry. This is a kid who's, been living on bananas and bagels and donuts from a dumpster. That's what
Mhm.
that's what she's been living on.
Yeah. Yeah, my kids have really enjoyed listening to those parts too.
Yeah.
Um, so what are some of the major themes that come across throughout the book? I think you talked about a little bit about Ku and the becoming more brave or
Yeah.
overcoming.
I think
Yeah.
it's courage is the main one. And then um, just being loyal to your flock or your
Mhm.
family or whoever that is, just loyalty, what does that look like in this situation? How can she be loyal to her animal family as well as her human family?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think especially since there's not an expectation that the animal family will necessarily be loyal to her. I think that they
That's
talk about
right.
that a little
Yeah.
bit in the book too. Um, so are there any points of discernment, anything that a parent would want to know before they have their child read this or read it with them that they should address or
No,
explore?
I'd say this book is perfect for reading to anybody who has the patience to listen to it. There's no uh, discernment items that I could see.
And out of 5 stars, what would you give?
I'll give it 5.
Woo! Another 5-star book. Yeah. Phyllis and I called this the road test. My kids and I have been listening to it on audio and they love it. The 7 and 9-year-old especially want to listen to it all the time. So yeah, so that's great. So we're gonna come back with Kaela in just a few minutes, or for you, it'll be just a few seconds. So we're back with Kaela. First of all, congratulations on your fantastic debut book.
Thank you.
Ku, yes. So my kids and I are really, really enjoying listening to it on audio, and we're a little bit less than halfway through, I think. And my girls, especially, they're 9 and almost 7, wanted me to let you know that they really love it. We typically only listen to audiobooks in the car, but they asked for this one to be brought in so they could listen to it at home too. So it's got like it's hit the mark. Yes, the
I,
kid audience loves it.
I'm very
So.
flattered. Please tell them that I'm very excited that they like it. And it means a lot to hear that. And authors care about hearing that sort of thing. So it's
Yeah,
very inspiring to
we
know.
want to encourage you to write even more.
Awesome. I'll take it.
So Phyllis will be asking the questions because she actually finished where we didn't quite finish yet. So yes, go ahead, Phyllis, whenever you're ready.
So I'm wondering why you wrote this book. Like, do you love pigeons, or you love birds, or you just love animals?
So that's a really good question. I would consider myself an animal lover, but not. I also would say that I'm an animal respecter, maybe more than in a kind of maybe theoretical sense, or like I want animals to be treated well. I don't actually have any pets at this point in my life. I know that there are many people in the world who are far more hands-on, devoted to rehabilitating animals that have been hurt or having a lot of animals in their home, and that's not been me. But since childhood, I was fascinated by the idea of children who were raised by animals and that kind of mythological feral child archetype, like, Tarzan. Or in when I was in middle school, I read a book called The Music of the Dolphins by Karen Hess, which was published in the 90s and has a much heavier tone than Coup. But it's about a girl who ends up being cared for by dolphins after an accident in somewhere in the Caribbean, and she lives with these dolphins on an island for years. And what happens when she's eventually rescued and returned to the human world? And I reread this book several times from my school library, and I was just trying to kind of crack the code of why I found it so fascinating. And at the same time, when I set out to write Coup, I wanted it to feel more like a cozy fairy tale of a sort than the kind of heavier tone that Hess's book had. So that's sort of what I set out to do when I wrote it. Like, what would a child who has this very unusual perspective, what would that tell us about our world, or what would our world look like through her eyes? And I still find that idea fascinating. So I went with it.
I do have to tell you that I love the pigeon language that you
Oh,
invented.
I'm
I
so
just
glad.
love it.
Thank you.
So, for example, uh, one says, "Go down now, you," and response, "How? Can't fly me." So you got the syntax, unique syntax, and it's yeah, I like it.
Thank you. I'm always happy to hear that when people appreciate it. I went back and forth a lot on how to make it work. And I tried out a lot of different ways. And for a couple of drafts, they spoke in normal human English. And that didn't, it made it too, it bumped them into Beatrix Potter territory, where it started to feel like they should be wearing little top hats and, having tea up on the roof. So that was like, that didn't work. And then I tried it where they just responded to everything with a single word. And it was, I'm sure it was a great exercise. Maybe someone else could have pulled it off. The constraint was too much. They didn't have any personality at that point. They were just the pigeon blob, responding in monotone. So that was sort of, this is the happy medium. And I was so happy because when I went through copy edits at my publisher, there was a lot that they flagged. The copy editing team, but they didn't change any. The pigeon language was consistent, so I was really happy that they didn't require like big changes. There weren't sections that I had forgotten and did it a different way. So yeah.
Awesome. You did
I
a
feel
great
like
job.
people also probably read it the way you imagined it too, because the audiobook reader and Phyllis both like say it the same way. So it seems like it must be, your intent must have carried through the words on the page to people reading it.
Hope so.
Yeah.
I heard a lot of, oh, they speak like Yoda when I was
Yeah, kind of.
which was unintentional because or maybe it was some type of deep subconscious thing, because I haven't seen Star Wars since I was a child. So I actually don't, I definitely didn't didn't base it on that, because I did have like a child ask me, "Did you base it on Yoda?" And I was like, "No, actually, no. I
You
haven't."
didn't time it with the Mandalorian
No.
story.
So Koo is living in a structure on the roof called a dovecote.
Yes.
Would you like to explain what that is?
Sure. A dovecote is the traditional, it's a word for the traditional home that people made for pigeons and doves for hundreds, probably thousands of years, all throughout Europe, the Middle East, and parts of North Africa. There are, if you travel through rural France and some parts of rural England too, and probably Germany, but I'm more familiar with the ones that I've seen photos of in France. You can see them. They come in different shapes. Many of them are round, some are square, like scattered around the countryside. And people raised pigeons for hundreds, thousands of years for food, for their eggs, and also for fun. Because pigeon racing is still very popular as an activity, especially in like Pakistan and parts of Afghanistan. And there are huge pigeon dovecotes in Iran, which I've seen photos of, that date back to the Middle Ages, that house thousands and thousands of birds. So how that functions for Koo is that until a few decades ago, from the late 1800s up through just after World War II, pigeon racing and pigeon keeping was actually popular in New York City, especially among immigrants from Italy and other parts of Southern Europe. And in Brooklyn and probably other areas, but I've actually spoken to the son of an old pigeon racer in Brooklyn that I knew through a church, through my old church. His dad raised them in a dovecote on their roof, and so I was just imagining I just imagined a kind of leftover dovecote from that era of New York, back when pigeon keeping was popular and people built them on their roof, and that this one had been abandoned, but the pigeons kept on living in it even after no one came to it anymore. So,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, sure.
So these pigeons are housebroken.
Yes, well, so that was an editorial point that required much going over. Pigeons can be housebroken. I've found lots of forum talk among bird keepers about their attempts at housebreaking their pigeons. It seems to be a 50-50, like it either happens or it doesn't, but they are trainable. They're very intelligent birds, and parrots, bigger birds, can be housebroken fairly easily, which at
Wow.
various points I actually did wonder, should I ditch the pigeons and make Koo raised by parrots? Make all of this easier. But I didn't.
I think it's better to have them, pigeons,
Yeah.
the wild animals that are there.
Right.
So I really enjoyed that scene in the supermarket. That was hysterical.
I'm so glad. I worked on that one for a long time. It was actually, once I got into the groove of it, it was really fun, and sort of had to be hacked back because she can encounter so many strange things from her point of view in the supermarket. Didn't want it to be 40 pages long, but yeah, that was really enjoyable. It was just, once I put on the kind of Koo glasses, it became a really fascinating way to think about the environment that we live in.
The
And I
Koo
also
glasses.
I had another scene that got cut where she went to a toy store and was completely puzzled by what passes for toys. She didn't understand why people would want to play with cars, which can kill pigeons. She didn't understand why we have this row of staring humanoid figures, dolls on shelves. But it didn't, in the end, I had to cut stuff. And that was one of the things that didn't make it in.
I thought it was so amusing that she thinks food comes from a dumpster.
Yeah.
So this grocery store is like dumpster on steroids. Great, good job.
Thank you. I love it when people get it and like it.
So our audience is homeschoolers. I'm curious if you have any contact with homeschoolers or?
Why I myself I am a formerly homeschooled person, or home educated, but kind of the opposite of the norm. I was homeschooled in high school, not in my elementary and middle school years, and so I I definitely have like one perspective, but then I didn't go through the younger years on personally myself. And I became a homeschooler. I advocated for it. I wanted to be one because I was really unhappy at that time, at the end of middle school, with uh, like the trajectory of classes and the pace. I wanted to be able to pursue things that I was interested in. And I was not happy in the kind of the large high school ecosystem culture. And so it worked out really well for me. I think ultimately I probably would have been happiest in a kind of co-op or a smaller alternative high school. But it was in the end, it was the right thing. And I would really like to homeschool my daughter, who's currently 3. My husband and I are seriously considering it. And if we have more children, or hopefully we do, then we'd like to homeschool them too.
I'm curious whether your book has any, study questions or something for that homeschoolers might use.
I've actually thought about getting, there's a teacher I talk with sometimes online, and she teaches 3rd or 4th grade out in California, and she now has gotten into curriculum guide writing. So I've been thinking about asking her to write a curriculum guide for KU, which could be used by homeschoolers too. I would just post it on my
Okay.
website. But I definitely think that there probably are a lot of different projects or questions or different areas of learning that could be applied through the book.
Oh, I
Mhm.
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
love I would love to hear from people who have
Yeah.
used it.
So what is your website?
My website is kaelanoel.com, my name. I had a lot of trouble learning to read and write, and I was one of the last kids in my class in elementary school to learn, and that was definitely a blow to my ego at that age.
Mm.
Um, One of my memories from that time of my childhood was in 2nd grade. I knew how to read, but I had been assigned, we had these, to back up a little, we had reading levels. So we would take a diagnostic test, and then they would tell us which number bin to take our books out of. A practice that I think has fallen out of favor. There's an actual term for it, but it's not as popular now. And so I got assigned to the lowest bin. And that was like, oh, the walk of shame over to bin 1 when lots of people were getting them out of bin,
Yeah.
6 or 7. But it was motivating. It was very motivating. I was no longer in bin 1 by the end of the year. And later I tested into gifted, and that was helpful. And it's why I always also think that testing for things like acceleration and gifted should be ongoing, because I tested into gifted in 3rd or 4th grade, and if the cutoff had been kindergarten or first, I don't
Mm.
think I would have been identified then by those standards. So it was like at the same time as I was struggling with reading and writing, I also loved stories, and I loved hearing stories, and I was read to all the time at home, which was very helpful. I was brought to the library all the time, which was helpful. And my mom would actually write down the stories that I dictated to her. So going back to preschool, I would just tell her these stories and insist that she write them down because I wanted them to be books. Um, so I always had this idea of being an author. At the same time, it was, I knew it was going to be hard, and I had all these ideas of writing. When I was a teenager, I had all these ideas of writing like the great American literary novel. And by the time I was in my 20s, I realized that no, I still have ideas like that sometimes, but I still loved classic children's literature. And in my heart, the way that I thought about books was I thought about them in that kind of 8 to 12-year-old like age. And that's when that was the kind of book that I wanted to write. And so I just kept going, and I got the idea for KU actually when I was a teenager. It was one of many book ideas that I had at the time that I wrote down or started, but this was the one that I just never dropped. And it took me over 10 years to complete the first draft. But I wasn't working on it continually. Like I try other things and stop, but I always came back to it. And then I rewrote it several more times. And as I went through the process of getting an agent, which took several years and several rounds of querying. And then after my agent chose me, Katie Grimm, she's fantastic. And she's a very editorial agent. She suggested that I rewrite it again. And so I did with her, like with her input. And sorry, you might be able to hear my 3-year-old crying. Okay. So I rewrote it, I revised it, and I ended up changing the ending about 3 times. And then she and I submitted it. And I was fortunate that Green Willow, which is a imprint of HarperCollins, my editor, Virginia Duncan, chose it. And she's wonderful. And she had a lot of ideas. And once her ideas were actually not any new scenes or any plot changes whatsoever. Almost all of her edits had to do with the prose on the page and adding detail, which was really interesting because I ended up adding maybe about 10,000 or even more, 10 to 20,000 words to, well, it wasn't that much. It was about 10,000 words that I added to the manuscript without adding any new scenes or deleting any. Yeah, so it all came through more detail. And she was so right. She would point out, say, oh, maybe in this area you could give more detail about how Ku is feeling, or maybe in this area you could describe the roof so it's really easy to visualize, or maybe in this area, it was all about detail. And that was really an interesting kind of exercise. And I feel like it gave me a lot of insight into how to get to that point earlier next time, like where to add detail to scenes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we really thank you for spending your time with us and talking about your lovely book.
Thank you for reading it and inviting me and having this. And it's been, you had asked wonderful questions, so it was a joy to answer.
Cool. We really like to hear the author's perspective, and even just listening to you talk about kind of the process of the editing and everything, it just adds a lot more to it. I'm excited to tell my kids about the dovecote, the history of it, and the fighting pigeons and stuff like, or racing pigeons, not fighting pigeons. So yeah, right. I know.
Google the photos of ancient dovecotes, or ones that are, you could put in medieval dovecote and you can see them. They're really wild architectural things.
Okay. We'll do that. I had a hard time. I wasn't sure what one was, but we just kind of were listening, so I didn't stop the car just to, but anyway. So for those of you who are out there listening, watching, we wish you a happy and productive trip to the library to pick up Ku, which is good on audio too. So thank you, Kaela. So yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you, Sarah. You've been wonderful hosts.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Love you.
Thanks.